Today I want to share some ideas with you for homemade Christmas gifts. And these are the type of gifts that are going to allow you to share your love of traditional foods with your friends and family. And I've got 3 categories: easy, medium, and those that take a little more time. But your friends and family are going to be absolutely delighted with any of these gifts. Hi, sweet friends. I'm Mary, and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, I think homemade Christmas gifts are always the best, and they're always appreciated, especially when they involve anything to do with food. So today I want to share with you some of the type of homemade Christmas gifts that I like to make. And of course, they all involve some form or another of traditional foods. So as I said, I've got the 3 categories of gifts. The simple, which don't involve any cooking and are very easy to put together. The medium category involve a little cooking, but it's well worth it. And then the 3rd category just take a little more time on your part, but are not particularly difficult, but are really special to give as a gift. Now, all the gifts that I'm going to talk about today have their own individual videos with printable recipes. And so I'll put all of this in the description underneath this video. So just open up the description and all the links will be there. And whatever I can put in iCards, I'll certainly put there too. But if you open up the description, everything will be there, and I'll also put the links in the pinned comment as well, because I know for some of you it's a little easier to find links when they're in the pinned comment. But either way, they'll take you to a video and a printable recipe, so you'll be all set. Now, the first category I want to talk about are the simple recipes. And these don't involve any cooking, and they're very easy to put together. And generally what I call these gifts are the make-ahead mixes. Now, within the category of simple, some of these are more simple than others. And one of the most simple ones I have to make is my hot cocoa mix. But that, along with the coffee creamer, which we'll talk about in a minute, are 2 of the most popular make-ahead mixes. Now, I've just put a little serving in this with some little marshmallows in this little jar with my little ribbon. Don't look too closely. I'm not a crafter. But I know that you can make this look really lovely with some fabric and whatnot. You can do individual servings in little jars, and then you can fill a basket with them, or you can just do a big serving in a big jar. Whatever way that you want to do this, this is very easy to throw together. It's really just a combination of powdered milk and some whole sweetener like a sucanat or whatever you like to use, and some cocoa powder. And I show you how to make it in a video, and I've got the printable recipe that you could even print out and attach along with your jar of hot cocoa mix. I share how to make the hot cocoa mix as well as how to reconstitute it into a nice cup of hot cocoa. And what's nice about this is it is made with a whole sweetener, so like a sucanat, or you can use a maple sugar or a date sugar or a coconut sugar, whatever whole sweetener you're using in your kitchen. And that has all the vitamins and minerals in it, so you're giving a gift to someone that has more nutrition than just what they can buy at the store in the little package that may have ingredients that are not necessarily healthy for us. And you can also add in some marshmallows. You can add in dehydrated marshmallows if you want to just have it all together and make it easy for people to put in their cup and just add some hot water, and then the marshmallows rehydrate. Or if you're just using regular marshmallows, you can put in a little piece of parchment paper that can divide the marshmallows from the cocoa mix. Or, as one of the viewers here recommended, which I thought was a very good idea and I never thought about it, was just to use one of those little cupcake liners. And if you have a little mini cupcake liner for the smaller jars, or even just cut it a little, so that it's a little shorter to fit into a small jar like this, or in a big jar, using larger cupcake holders. So I thought that was a very clever idea for holding the marshmallows if they've not been dehydrated. And then speaking of the coffee creamer, which I mentioned, when I was talking about the hot cocoa mix, the coffee creamer has been very popular. And what's nice is all of these make-ahead mixes that I have listed here, all are shelf-stable. These are all in their powder form. And so the coffee creamer mix is wonderful because you can keep this in your pantry. The person you give it to can keep it in their pantry. They can take a little bit with them if they like to take some coffee creamer in the car with them to work or to wherever they may be going. And so it's not something you have to worry about being in its liquid form. And you have many options for how to make a coffee creamer. You can make a coffee creamer using the typical, like a non-fat powdered milk that you can buy at your grocery store, which would make a lower calorie coffee creamer. You can also make your coffee creamer with whole milk powdered milk, and you can even make it with heavy cream powder. They actually dehydrate heavy cream, and you can have a heavy cream powder, which would make basically like a keto-friendly coffee creamer. And when it comes to sweetening the coffee creamer, you can leave the sweetener out, or you can use a whole sweetener to add into that. And I show you a few tips and tricks to how to prepare whatever sweetener you use, whether it is like a sucanat or a coconut sugar and whatnot, so that when you add that into your powdered milk, whether it's the instant non-fat or the whole milk powdered milk or the heavy cream powder, that it blends beautifully, and then it blends really well when people put it into their coffee. Plus, I share with you how to flavor them. So you can make like a pumpkin pie spice, an apple pie spice, a vanilla coffee creamer. There's a whole array of flavorings that you can use to add to this powdered coffee creamer, whatever way you want to make it, with whatever type of powdered milk or powdered heavy cream you want to use, or even a combination. You can do like one that's more like a half and half, part heavy cream powder, part milk powder. So there's a lot there. And I know many of you have asked me, is there a way to make a hazelnut powder? I haven't quite figured that one out yet. Often the hazelnut flavoring is very artificial, and it's in a liquid form, which would no longer allow our powdered creamer to be shelf stable. But I will keep looking for you, and hopefully one of these days we'll come across a healthy version of a powdered hazelnut flavoring. Now, the other make-ahead mixes that I share involve baking. And what's nice about these is that they can be a great way to introduce friends and family to baking with whole grains and making it very easy for them. Because there are certain recipes that lend themselves very well to incorporating whole grains and whole sugars. And so I've got cookie mixes, I've got cake mixes, I have a muffin mix with a crumb topping make-ahead mix, and I also have general baking mixes. And all of them lend themselves in each of these videos, and along with the recipes that you can print out for how the mix was made, as well as how to then take that mix and turn it into the particular cookie or the particular cake or whatever the case may be. And you can attach that to the jar. But for the cookies, I've got oatmeal, chocolate chip. I even have snickerdoodles, which are a wonderful cookie. And I've got some other sugar cookies. I've got, in the general baking mix, I've got a pancake waffle mix. I've got a Bisquick copycat mix. I've got a biscuit mix. I've got the cake mixes, and I've got how to make a chocolate cake as well as how to make a spice cake. And these are all make-ahead mixes where the person just has to dump the jar into a bowl and then add in the wet ingredients. It's like having a box cake mix, but something that's very healthy. And you can attach the little recipe to the jar that you can print out from my website that will tell them what wet ingredients they need to add in and then what temperature to bake the cake at. Plus, I have a tip. I share a tip in there for a yellow cake mix and how to keep your yellow cake mix yellow, because that is the one drawback whenever you're baking with whole grains. And for some of the other healthy baking mixes, I also have mixes for brownies and cornbread. And again, all made with whole grain flours, all made with whole sugars. But don't worry, if you yourself are at the beginning of your journey from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, and you may have started incorporating whole grains into your kitchen, but you've not yet incorporated whole sugars, don't worry. In the printable recipes for making these make-ahead mixes, I share with you how you can add white sugar if that's what you have in your kitchen right now. Because I know that when you're on this journey and you want to take this journey slow and you want to incorporate traditional foods into your kitchen slowly so that you can be successful and not feel overwhelmed, that many people tend to start first with incorporating whole grains and then moving on to incorporating whole sugars like your sucanat or your maple sugar, date sugar, coconut sugar, so on and so forth. So know that you can, depending on where you are on your journey, you can use white sugar. And then one more make-ahead mix that is also very popular, similar to the hot cocoa mix and the coffee creamer mix, is a cream of soup mix. And again, this is very easy for you to put together, and you can make a big jar of it. My husband loves this, and it is so easy to make the powdered form. And then again, you can print out all the information on my website for how to make the powdered form to give as a gift, and then along with how to reconstitute it to use in a recipe. And this is wonderful because it's made from very wholesome ingredients, and you're going to get away from having to use a can of condensed soup, which often has a lot of salt and a lot of other chemicals in it that we really don't want to be incorporating into our traditional foods kitchen. Plus, it's almost easier to use the homemade version because you don't have to worry about buying it at the grocery, having the can of soup that you bought at the grocery store and then opening the can of soup and trying to reconstitute it, and it can be kind of messy and getting it out of the can and all. The powdered version is so easy, and you will reconstitute it like that, and you'll have a beautiful cream of soup mix in any variety that you want to make. You can make a chicken cream of soup mix, you can make a beef cream of soup mix, and you can even make a mushroom cream of soup mix. And I explain everything in the video and in the recipe. It's very easy to do, and it will be such a popular gift to anyone that you give it to, especially busy people who want to be able to get dinner on the table quickly, but don't want to be involved in, trying to make a cream sauce, and may be on their own journey of wanting to get away from using those cans of condensed soup. They will so appreciate this homemade powdered cream of soup mix, which is very shelf stable. Now let's move on to the medium category. Now, these involve, or at least a couple of them, I've got my list here, involve cooking on your part. But what a dream all of these are. They just make lovely gifts that anyone would be happy to receive. Plus, I've got a couple of different categories to meet various dietary restrictions, in essence. And the first couple of ones are jam. And in my recipe videos and then the attached recipes, I'm using strawberries, but you can use any fruit that you have on hand. And you can also use frozen fruit to make these jams. And if you're doing this next year, you could even make them in the summer, because in the video, when this fruit is in season, because in each of these videos, I show you how to water bath can these fruit jams once you've made them to make them shelf stable, which make them perfect for giving as gifts. Now, one of the jams I show you how to make is a low sugar strawberry jam, which still has that really wonderful sort of sweet flavor that we associate with jam, yet we've reduced the sugar significantly, actually by half. So that can really be appreciated by a lot of folks. But then I know there are people who really look for a jam that has no sugar, and I've got you covered. So I've got a no sugar strawberry jam. And again, both of these have step-by-step water bath canning instructions. So if you're new to water bath canning, I walk you through right from the beginning to the end. Nothing is left to guesswork. And you can be watching the video as you're water bath canning. You can stop the video and move on to the next step. Step by step, I walk you through the whole thing. So you've got your low sugar jam or your no sugar jam. And then the third recipe, what if you want to make jam the real old-fashioned way, like our grandmothers did before they had store-bought or packaged pectin? I show you how to make jam without store-bought pectin. And it doesn't involve you having to make your own pectin first, which I would put in the more complicated category of recipes. It's simply the old-fashioned way of cooking fruit so that you don't need the pectin that you would get at the store, or even a homemade version of pectin that you might make from crab apples or something like that. It's just the old-fashioned slow-cooked jam that's very delicious and made with no pectin. And again, I show you how to water bath can it. Now, another recipe that I want to share with you that also makes a wonderful homemade Christmas gift, and this sort of goes hand in hand in many ways with the cream of soup mix. Now, the cream of soup mix is very easy to make. This next one I'm going to talk to you about is a little more involved, but will be very much appreciated by whomever you give this gift to. And it's a vegetable bouillon. It's a homemade vegetable bouillon. And there's two ways that you can give this to someone depending on the level of refrigeration that you're ready to basically give this, if you do give this to someone as a gift. And what I mean by that is, I show you in one video how to make a homemade vegetable bouillon. And it involves salt and a lot of different types of vegetables. And you grind it all up, and basically it's in the form of a wet paste. Now, you can keep this in your refrigerator, or you can keep it in your freezer. Because of all the salt, it's not going to freeze solid. I'll normally make a big batch and have one in my fridge that I'm using on a regular basis, and then another in my freezer to replace the one in my fridge when I use all of that up. And you can just scoop out what you need. It lasts a long time in the fridge as well, again, because of the level of salt. And if someone wants to have a vegetable broth, they can simply scoop some of that out, add hot water, and they can have a lovely vegetable broth to drink. Or they can scoop some out, put it in a soup pot, add in some water, and they've got their base for making any type of soup that they want to make, whether it's a vegetable soup or a bean soup or any soup, really. It just makes this wonderful, richly flavored base to make a soup or a broth or even a sipping broth. And so I love this. And it's really not hard to make, because it's just, you know, a little chopping on your part of veggies, throwing them into your food processor with your salt and whirling it all up, and then decanting it into whatever container that you want. But you can take this one step further, which I show in a follow-up video, for how to dehydrate this so that the person then has something that's shelf-stable, basically a shelf-stable vegetable bouillon. And you don't need any special equipment. Yes, if you have a dehydrator, that's wonderful. You can dry it in your dehydrator, but you can also dry this in your oven. And there's no special technique involved where you have to try to crack the oven and open. I don't like getting into drying things that way. I always feel it's a little dangerous. Basically, you're just going to, as I'm a former New Yorker, we say smear out. You're going to just smear some of the vegetable bouillon out as thin as you can on some parchment paper, put it in your oven on a low temp, and just it'll dry out, and it'll become this wonderful powder you can just basically break up in your hands, or if you want to put it, you know, into a little grinder, or a blender and make it a super fine powder, you can definitely do that too. But now you've made something that's shelf stable. And you can fill up a big jar of that. You know, it's relatively reasonable to make. I do like to use a good quality salt, you know, but salt, really any type of salt you use is usually very reasonably priced. But I like to use a nice sea salt, and you can make a nice big jar of that. It's basically going to have some tomato, some celery, some onions, it's things like that. And you can make a nice big jar of that. Somebody can put that on their shelf in their pantry, and it just streamlines the whole dinner process or lunch process, depending on what you're making. And then the nice thing is it's very wholesome. It's sea salt and a lot of vegetables. When you look at the ingredients of bouillon cubes or bouillon powder at the grocery store, there's a whole host of ingredients in there that I can't even pronounce. And so being able to get away from that and getting to something that's wholesome, and not only using that in your own kitchen, but giving that to a family member or a friend who you're helping to try and encourage on that journey from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, this is a great introduction. Or maybe they're already on their journey and they really appreciate these types of things. Because yes, it's relatively easy to make, but sometimes depending on what someone's schedule is like, making this for them can be so appreciated. Now let's move on to the little bit of what I call the more advanced category. These are not difficult to make by any stretch of the imagination, but they do require a little more time and preparation on your part. The first recipe I want to talk to you about, in a way, takes us back to the jam recipes that we talked about in the medium category. This isn't exactly a jam, it is a marmalade. And a marmalade takes a little longer to make than a fruit jam. So that's why I've put this in the advanced category. When making a marmalade, and the marmalade recipe I share is a 3 citrus marmalade, and it's delicious. You're going to use the zest of a grapefruit and of an orange and of a lemon. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful combination. But as I said, making a marmalade is a little more involved because you do have to remove all of the zest from the citrus, and you have to cook that before you even move on, so that you're kind of removing some of the bitterness of any pith that is on your zest. And then once that's cooked, then you move on to the stage of actually making the marmalade. So if you have any family or friends who really like marmalade, they'll be so thrilled to receive a homemade marmalade. And these do not require any added pectin, because with the zest and the pith of a citrus-based marmalade, you've got a lot of natural pectin in there. So this is another jam, or in essence a marmalade, I should say, that you can make without pectin. And when I say without pectin, I mean without store-bought pectin. But this is a wonderful marmalade recipe. Plus, in that video, I walk you through step by step how to water bath can your marmalade once you've made it and got it into the jar. And I'm there right from start to finish, so there's no guesswork. So if you're new to home canning and you're new to water bath canning, that's a great video, because I go over all the equipment you need, and then we go through all the steps of home canning our marmalade. And the next recipe I want to share with you is a little more involved, but it's really time that you're not doing anything. It's just time that you have to set aside to allow you to reach the point where you can make this recipe. And what I'm talking about is making homemade bouillon powder. Now, it's not vegetable bouillon, which is relatively easy. I put it in the medium category, but it's relatively easy to make. What I'm talking about is how to make chicken bouillon powder, turkey bouillon powder, or beef bouillon powder. And you're going to make this homemade. Now, you can make these bouillon powders from bone broth, which is what I highly recommend you do, or you can just make it from a broth, which is a little weaker, or you can make it from a stock, which is generally just made with bones. Now I know it can be a little confusing. I have a video where I share with you the difference between broth, stock, and bone broth. And basically just a quick little review is broth is generally made from things that are meaty with just a little bit of bone. Stock is generally made from just bones with very little meat on them. And then bone broth is made from meaty bones, so more meat and less bone. Marrow bones, which are generally the ones that are used to make stock because they don't have or have very little meat on them. And then the third category is high cartilage bones, like oxtails or patellas or knuckles or neck bones. So it's that three combination of bones that make bone broth, which make it the most nutritious and often the one that's the most gelatinous. So it's very high in gelatin, and as we know from scientists, the gelatin in bone broth is so nourishing for us. It nourishes our gut, it nourishes our hair, our skin, our nails. It's just very good and very nourishing. And so if you want, you can make your bouillon powder, and this is a bouillon powder that's going to be shelf stable. You can make your bouillon powder from your homemade bone broth. So for example, say you've made chicken bone broth and you've really defatted it very well, and now you're left with just the bone broth. You can dehydrate that bone broth. And again, you don't need any fancy equipment. Yes, if you have a dehydrator, you can certainly use it, but you can also put this into your oven, again, in a very shallow dish, a couple of very shallow dishes, and put this into your oven, again, with the door closed. As I've shared, I'm not one for having the door cracked open. I always worry about that. But you just want to get the lowest setting in your oven, put your bone broth in there to dry up. It'll dry up, and then basically whether you do it in the oven or in the dehydrator, when it's all dried up, it almost looks like stained glass. It's like going to be in little chips, and you're going to be able to look through it. Then what you do is you take this and you pulverize it either in one of those little coffee bean grinders or the blender. You can do, if you've got one of those fancy high-speed blenders, you can do it like in 30 seconds. And now you have bouillon. Now, you can keep it just as is, or, especially for people that who may not like to take a lot of salt, so you can make this fabulous, very nutritious, homemade bouillon powder that's going to add fabulous flavor to whatever the person wants to use it for, or without any salt, and then let them determine how much salt they want to add into their recipe. Or at this point, you can go ahead and add in your sea salt. And you just want a very fine ground sea salt that's dry, that's very dry. You don't want one of those heavy, wet Celtic gray sea salts. If you do add that, you would want to then have to re-dry it. So I don't recommend that. You just want a very dry, fine sea salt, or whatever salt you have on hand. And when you go to pulverize your bone broth that's been dried, you can add in your salt at that point. But I highly recommend keeping in mind to whom you may be giving the bouillon powder, and if they would appreciate something that is salt-free. And what's nice about homemade bouillon powder is if you have someone in your family or a friend who is buying these bone broth powders and taking them, for energy or the collagen or whatever the case may be, this can actually replace that. Because when you go to reconstitute this, say you want to use this as a drink, you're going to take that, say you've made your chicken bouillon powder, you're going to take that chicken bouillon powder and you're going to put that in a mug and you're going to add some hot water. It's going to immediately dissolve and become this lovely sipping broth. And if you went and put that in the refrigerator, it would gel up again just like your bone broth that you made, that if you're making it properly and, not boiling it and all of that, which I go over, and I have many recipes, many videos on making bone broth. And all that collagen will still be intact. And you'll have, so if you put that cup into the fridge, it would be gelatinous once it cooled down. So now you've given someone this wonderful chicken bouillon powder, which is basically a bone broth powder. Or if you made beef bone broth, you've given them a bone broth powder, a beef bone broth powder. We think of it as bouillon, as home cooks, but these are wonderfully appreciated gifts, not only to the home cook who wants to incorporate these into her recipe, but to people who enjoy taking them for the nutritional value. So it's a little more involved in your part, that you're making your bone broth and then you're drying it and then you're pulverizing it. But it is the type of gift that people are really flabbergasted when they receive it, because they know the time that goes into making bone broth, and having it homemade is very special. And also on our part, especially when it comes to making chicken bone broth, it's not a costly endeavor. I often say you can make chicken bone broth for pennies a jar. And being able to dehydrate that into a bouillon powder, and using many of your jars of it to get, because it's amazing how one small jar, once you dehydrate it, will about a tablespoon is like a whole cup or a whole jar of bone broth. It can really dehydrate down to quite a small amount. But what a nice savings that is for the person to whom you're giving it to, because even though making chicken bone broth is a relatively reasonable endeavor, the time involved does add up. And yet it's amazing to me how expensive these chicken bone broth powders are, because even with the time involved, we can still do them very reasonably, because if you have a couple of chicken carcass and a couple of chicken feet, you can make an incredibly rich chicken bone broth. And then to dehydrate that, you're making a wonderful, natural, delicious, and very rich in nutrients, and especially collagen, bone broth powder, chicken bone broth powder, or chicken bouillon. So it's very versatile. Use it in a recipe or turn it into a sipping broth. Either way, depending on who you're thinking of in terms of your family or your friends, you can say this is something you can use as a base to make soups and stews, or add it to your water when you're making grains. Or if you're giving it to someone who really enjoys sipping broth, you could say, just add a little hot water and you've got a wonderful mug of bone broth. Now, I have a little bonus that I want to share here with you. And this is not the type of gift just for anybody. This may be the best gift, though, for someone in your life who is truly a traditional foods foodie. And I know foodie is like a little out-of-date term now, but if you have someone who's full on their journey and is really running a traditional foods kitchen, I have such a clever idea for you. And this is a video that I'll definitely link to below, but I show you how to make cream, face cream and foot cream, by using beef tallow. And as I joke, I say, yes, ladies, that's right, we're putting beef fat on our skin. But you can add to the beef tallow, and I kind of put this in a little bit of the more advanced category, because either you're going to buy your beef tallow or you're going to render your own, depending again where you yourself are on your journey and what you do. But this you really can just make in a very small jar. I usually, when I give this to my friends, I'll put it like in a 4-ounce jelly jar, because you only use a little bit and it goes a long way and it lasts a long time. That's the wonderful thing about tallow, beef tallow, is that it's very shelf stable. But you'll melt a little bit of the tallow, you'll add some essential oils, and you will have a wonderful face cream. And I'll be having lunch sometimes with one of my girlfriends back before all this stuff we've been going through now in 2020, but back in the day when it was nice to have a ladies' luncheon. But I'll never forget sitting across the table from my friend, who's my best friend here in Texas. And she said, Mary, you know, we're the same age. She said, oh, we're getting older and whatnot. She said, but your skin looks very good. What cream do you use? And but she knows me well and knows that, you know, I'm really into traditional foods, but I almost felt a little silly saying it. But I said, I put beef fat on my face. Well, she started laughing, and she said, why am I not surprised? You with nourishing traditions and traditional foods and all this, that, and the other thing, I'm not surprised you're putting beef fat on your face. And she said, and now I want some. So I made her a batch, and she just fell in love with it. And I put in a little essential oil, I put in a little frankincense, and I put in a little holy basil essential oil, and sometimes a little myrrh essential oil. It's really, you know, I kind of just think about what oils are good for the skin and things like that. And you just need a few drops. You could really put in anything that you like, lavender, you know, so on and so forth. And so now, you know, she and I are just devotees, I should say, to using this beef broth cream, or not beef broth, beef tallow cream. And then I make one where you can put a little lavender and a little peppermint, you know, different things like that, and to use on your feet. And I'm telling you, if you have a problem with cracked heels, I had such a problem with this for many years. My heels were so dry all the time, and they just seemed to be getting drier as I got older. And I had already started using, you know, beef tallow on my face. Now I'm in my mid-60s, and I said, you know, these heels are really getting dry. And then I said, gee, I like the way the beef tallow feels on my face and seems to you know, give me nice moisture. I'm going to try this on my heels. So I just added essential oils, though, that I felt like for nighttime, putting a little lavender essential oil in the beef tallow is very nice because it can help you, you know, lavender helps you relax and feel sleepy. Maybe for early in the day, putting in some peppermint oil, which peppermint is always great for feet. So there are different things you can do for that. So that's a little bonus tip. If you have someone who would really enjoy the idea of receiving a homemade and very healthy cream with very few ingredients, very natural, but who's open to putting beef tallow on their face or feet or wherever the case may be. Well, if you have enjoyed this list, I hope that you'll click on this video over here where I'll have a playlist that'll cover all of the videos and recipes that I talked here today and in the description below. And so I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.